good morning. Well, it's morning here. Good morning, evening, or afternoon, or whatever it is where you are. My name is Shannon. Welcome to the Cozy Tea Place. We are doing a full read-along of Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen, and today we are reading through chapters 13, 14, and 15. So I'm going to read through each chapter, pause at the end of each chapter, we'll have a discussion, and to be honest, I'll probably discuss as we go, and there will be discussion questions. If you all want to comment and discuss in the comments as well, you are more than welcome. I would love to chat with you. And the plan is to finish this by October 17th when the newest film adaptation comes out from Focus Features of Sense and Sensibility. And I also very well may make a reference to the 1995 film adaptation as we read through, just as a heads up. If you haven't seen it, just know that I might do that. And if you want to read along with us, please feel free. You are so welcome, and I will link all of the previous videos down below. If you go back to the very first video, which would make sense, that would be a good place to start, then in that video there is a little bit of like just a mini history lesson on the novel itself, and also a little information on Jane Austen's prose and how she writes, and then therefore how we read it. With all that being said, I am not an expert. I'm just a lover. I'm just here because I love Jane Austen. I love all of the, well, I shouldn't say all of the adaptations, but I always look forward to the adaptations of her work. So go back and watch the videos if you want to catch up, or dive right in with us here now. Who knows? I mean, maybe you are an expert on Sense and Sensibility. In chapter 12, where we last left off, we were learning what Margaret and Elinor think of Marianne and Willoughby's connection and what it means. Are they engaged and all of these things? They seem very close. And we learned a lot about Elinor's embarrassment and grief and kind of what she's going through on a personal level amongst the company. Then at the end of the chapter, they make it known that they're going to a place called Whitwell for kind of like a day excursion. So let's see what happens. Chapter 13. Their intended excursion to Whitwell turned out very differently from what Elinor had expected. She was prepared to be wet through, fatigued, and frightened, but the event was still more unfortunate, for they did not go at all. By 10 o'clock, the whole party were assembled at the park, or the main house of Barton Park, where they were to breakfast. The morning was rather favorable, though it had rained all night, as the clouds were then dispersing across the sky and the sun frequently appeared. They were all in high spirits and good humor, eager to be happy and determined to submit to the greatest inconveniences and hardships rather than be otherwise. I love that little mini history weather report. And it's so interesting, too, how reliant upon weather they would be at the time. That was my puppy. While they were at breakfast, the letters were brought in. Among the rest, there was one for Colonel Brandon. He took it, looked at the direction, or where it was from, changed color, and immediately left the room. "What is the matter with Brandon?" said Sir John. Nobody could tell. "I hope he has no bad news," said Lady Middleton. "It must be something extraordinary that could take Colonel Brandon leave my breakfast table so suddenly." In about 5 minutes he returned. "No bad news, Colonel, I hope," said Mrs. Jennings as soon as he entered the room. "Not at all, ma'am, I thank you." "Was it from Avignon? I hope it is not to say that your sister is worse." "No, ma'am, it came from town, and it is merely a letter of business. So when they speak of town, it is London." But how came the hand to discompose you so much if it was only a letter of business? Come, this won't do, Colonel, so let us hear the truth of it." She's so nosy. "My dear madam," said Lady Middleton, "recollect what you are saying." "Perhaps it is to tell you that your cousin Fanny is married," said Mrs. Jennings, without attending to her daughter's reproof or reprimand. "No, indeed, it is not." "Well, then I know who it is from, Colonel, and I hope she is well." "Whom do you mean, ma'am?" said he, coloring a little. "Oh, you know who I mean." I am particular, this word is so hard for me. "I am particularly sorry, ma'am," said he, addressing Lady Middleton, "that I should receive this letter today, for it is on business which requires my immediate attendance in town." "In town!" cried Mrs. Jennings. "What can you have to do in town at this time of year?" "My own loss is great," he continued, "in being obliged to leave so agreeable a party, but I am more the concerned as I fear my presence is necessary to gain your admittance at Whitwall." So if you recall, when they were talking about going to Whitwall, Brandon needs to be there because Brandon is the only one that knows, like, the owner of the house or something, and so he is the only one that essentially is allowed there. He can bring guests, but what a blow upon them all this was. Or was this? What a blow upon them all was this. "But if you write a note to the housekeeper, Mr. Brandon," said Marianne eagerly, "will it not be sufficient?" He shook his head. "We must go," said Sir John. "It shall not be put off when we are so near it. You cannot go to town till tomorrow, Brandon, and that is all." "I wish it could be so easily settled, but it is not in my power to delay my journey for one day." "If you would but let us know what your business is," said Mrs. Jennings, "we might see whether it could be put off or not." "You would not be 6 hours later," said Willoughby, "if you were to defer your journey till our return." "I cannot afford to lose 1 hour." Elinor then heard Willoughby say in a low voice to Marianne, "There are some people who cannot bear a party of pleasure. Brandon is one of them. He was afraid of catching cold, I dare say, and invented this trick for getting out of it. I would lay 50 guineas the letter was of his own writing." "I have no doubt of it," replied Marianne. "They drive me crazy." "There is no persuading you to change your mind, Brandon, I know of old, when once you are determined on anything. But, however, I hope you will think better of it." This is Sir John, I should have said. "Consider, here are the 2 Miss Careys come over from Newton, the 3 Miss Dashwoods walked up from the cottage, and Mr. Willoughby got up 2 hours before his usual time, on purpose to go to Whitwell." Colonel Brandon again repeated his sorrow at being the cause of disappointing the party, but at the same time declared it to be unavoidable. "Well, then, when will you come back again?" "I hope we shall see you at Barton," added her ladyship, "as soon as you can conveniently leave town, and we must put off the party to Whitwell till you return." "You are very obliging, but it is so uncertain when I may have it in my power to return, that I dare not engage for it at all." "Oh, he must and shall come back," cried Sir John. "If he is not here by the end of the week, I shall go after him." "I so do, Sir John," cried Mrs. Jennings, "and then perhaps you may find out what his business is." "I do not want to pry into other men's concerns. I suppose it is something he is ashamed of." They just they're just talking like this in front of him. Colonel Brandon's horses were announced. "You do not go to town on horseback, do you?" added Sir John. "No, only to Honiton. I shall then go by post." "Well, as you are resolved to go, I wish you a good journey, but you had better change your mind. I assure you it is not in my power." He then took leave of the whole party, or said good-bye. "Is there no chance of my seeing you and your sisters in town this winter, Miss Dashwood?" "I am afraid none at all." So this is to Elinor, and Elinor said no. "Then I must bid you farewell for a longer time than I should wish to do." To Marianne he merely bowed and said nothing. "Come, Colonel," said Mrs. Jennings, "before you go, do let us know what you are going about." He wished her a good morning, and attended by Sir John left the room. The complaints and lamentations which politeness had hitherto restrained now burst forth universally, and they all agreed again and again how provoking it was to be so disappointed. "I can guess what his business is, however," said Mrs. Jennings exultingly, or happily. "Can you, ma'am?" said almost everybody. "Yes, it is about Miss Williams, I am sure." "And who is Miss Williams?" asked Marianne. "What! Do you not know who Miss Williams is? I am sure you must have heard of her before. She is a relation of the Colonel's, my dear, a very near relation. We will not say how near for fear of shocking the young ladies." Then, lowering her voice a little, she said to Elinor, "She is his natural daughter, or his daughter born out of wedlock." "Indeed!" "Oh, yes, and as like him as she can stare. I dare say the Colonel will leave her all his fortune." Lady Middleton's delicacy was shocked, and in order to banish so improper a subject as the mention of a natural daughter, she actually took the trouble of saying something herself about the weather. It's so funny that weather is such a common theme for when things get awkward. It's like, oh, look at the state of the sky or whatever. But it's funny that Lady Middleton is so uncomfortable by the mention of a child or a person born out of wedlock, and how like scandalous that is that she took it upon herself to change the subject. She's latched on to when the subject has been changed in the past, but she's never initiated it, but she initiated it this time. When Sir John returned, he joined most heartily in the general regret on so unfortunate an event, concluding, however, by observing that as they were all got together, they must do something by way of being happy, and after some consultation it was agreed that although happiness could only be enjoyed at Whitwell, they might procure a tolerable composure of mind by driving about the country. The carriages were then ordered. Willoughby's was first, and Marianne never looked happier than when she got into it. He drove through the park very fast, and they were soon out of sight, and nothing more of them was seen till their return, which did not happen till after the return of all the rest. The bug. They both seemed delighted with their drive, but said only in general terms that they had kept in the lanes while the others went on the downs. Suspicious. It was settled that there should be a dance in the evening, and that everybody should be extremely merry all day long. Some more of the Careys came to dinner, and they had the pleasure of sitting down nearly 20 to table, which Sir John observed with great contentment. Willoughby took his usual place between the 2 elder Miss Dashwoods. Mrs. Jennings sat on Elinor's right hand, and they had not been long seated before she leaned behind her and Willoughby and said to Marianne, loud enough for them both to hear, I have found you out in spite of all of your tricks. I know where you spent the morning. Marianne colored and replied very hastily, Where, pray? Did you not know, said Willoughby, that we had been out in my curricle? Yes, yes, Mr. Impudence or Mr. Cheeky. I know that very well, and I was determined to find out where you had been to. I hope you like your house, Miss Marianne. It is a very large one, I know, and when I come to see you, I hope you will have new furnished it, for it wanted it very much when I was there 6 years ago. Marianne turned away in great confusion. Mrs. Jennings laughed heartily, and Elinor found that in her resolution to know where they had been, she had actually made her own woman inquire of Mr. Willoughby's groom, and that she had by that method been informed that they had gone to Allenham, and had spent a considerable time there in walking about the garden and going all over the house. That is crazy. We're going to talk so much about this. Elinor could hardly believe this to be true, as it seemed very unlikely that Willoughby should propose or Marianne consent to enter the house while Mrs. Smith was in it, with whom Marianne had not the smallest acquaintance. But is it surprising, Elinor? Really? Considering. As soon as they left the dining room, Elinor inquired of her about it, and great was her surprise when she found out that every circumstance related by Mrs. Jennings was perfectly true. Marianne was quite angry with her for doubting it. Why should you imagine, Elinor, that we did not go there, or that we did not see this house, or see the house? Is not it what you have often wished to do yourself? Yes, Marianne, but I would not go while Mrs. Smith were there, and with no other companion than Mr. Willoughby. Mr. Willoughby, however, is the only person who can have a right to show that house, and as we went in an open carriage, it was impossible to have any other companion. I never spent a pleasanter morning in my life. I am afraid, replied Elinor, that the pleasantness of an employment does not always evince its propriety, or, no matter how much fun something is, that does not mean it's right. This is Marianne. On the contrary, nothing can be stronger proof of it, Elinor, for if there had been any real impropriety in what I did, I should have been sensible of it at the time, for we always know when we are acting wrong, and with such a conviction I could have no pleasure. But, my dear Marianne, as it has already exposed you to some very impertinent remarks or disrespectful or out-of-line remarks from Mrs. Jennings, do you not now begin to doubt the discretion of your own conduct? If the impertinent remarks of Mrs. Jennings are to be the proof of impropriety in conduct, we are all offending every moment all our lives. I value not her censure or disapproval any more than I should do her commendation or her praise. I am not sensible of having done anything wrong in walking over Mrs. Smith's grounds or in seeing her house. They will one day be Mr. Willoughby's, and if they were one day to be your own, Marianne, you would not be justified in what you have done. She blushed at this hint, but it was even visibly gratifying to her. So Marianne was kind of put in her place with that remark from Elinor, but she also liked it. She liked that Elinor implied that the house could one day be hers because she would one day be married to Willoughby. And after a 10 minutes interval of earnest thought, she came to her sister again and said with great good humor, Perhaps, Elinor, it was rather ill-judged in me to go to Allenham, but Mr. Willoughby wanted particularly to show me the place, and it is a charming house, I assure you. There is one remarkably pretty sitting room upstairs, of a nice comfortable size for constant use, and with modern furniture it would be delightful. It is a corner room and has windows on two sides. On one side you look across the bowling green behind the house to a beautiful hanging wood, and on the other you have a view of the church and village, and beyond them of those fine bold hills that we have so often admired. I did not see it to advantage, or at its best, for nothing could be more forlorn than the furniture. But if it were newly fitted up, a couple £100, Willoughby says, would make it one of the pleasantest summer rooms in England. Could Elinor have listened to her without interruption from the others, she would have described every room in the house with equal delight. That's the end of chapter 13. I have so many notes. I have so many things to say. I think I literally wrote a 5-paragraph essay for each of these chapters. And I was kind of laughing as I was typing along that I can't believe I dreaded doing that in school. So first of all, I am, of course, incredibly intrigued by what has taken Brandon so quickly from the party. But I found myself, through personalizing the story and feeling related to the characters, I almost found myself less curious because of how nosy and invasive Mrs. Jennings was being. I was like, I'm good. I was like, I don't need to know where you're going. You do you, boo. Do whatever you got to do. We learned that Brandon possibly has a daughter. The reason why I say possibly is because is because this is coming from Mrs. Jennings, who is known to yap and to talk and to make up stories to entertain herself and others. But if Miss Williams is his daughter, then she's saying that it's his natural daughter, so a daughter out of wedlock. Heaven forbid. Whatever it is that takes him away, it's taking him away to London for quite a while. He's asks Elinor, he's like, will your sisters be in London? Will I see you in the winter? She says no. And he's like, well, I'm afraid I won't see you for quite some time. So it could be, I don't know, a lot, months and months, or a year before he sees them again. I found it interesting that the only person in the whole party that he addresses with a goodbye or when will I see you again was Elinor, his bestie. The only one that he really seemed to care about was via Elinor, perhaps also about Marianne, but I think genuinely he found like a great friend in Elinor. I love that he doesn't acknowledge Willoughby at all. This whole situation made me think that the restraint needed during this time was bananas. I'm not sure I could do it. Now, a discussion question or just something to ponder about for this section of the chapter, I find the concept of time so interesting in this era because, of course, it's valid that Brandon didn't want to waste 1 hour before leaving so urgently, but really, what could send him off so quickly? You have to take a horse, and then you have to wait for the post, and then you have to get to London, and then you have to figure out where to go, and then there's no way to make sure you get there. Well, I didn't live at this time, so I don't know. Maybe it was much more streamlined. Maybe he knows exactly how long the horse takes to get to Honiton and then the post to London. So I suppose, it makes sense. I'm answering the question for myself. You can answer it for yourself in the comments. But what do you think it could be? And how do you think they related to time differently during this era? I found that just really interesting. Now, on to Marianne. I find Marianne, I have like a visceral reaction to Marianne and Willoughby. They drive me crazy. But Marianne, as a character, I genuinely find so interesting because I admire her boldness and her clarity of values. And I think that that is something that can very often be found in youth, in teenagers. It's kind of like the conversation that Elinor and Brandon had together in previous chapters, where Brandon was like, don't wish for her to lose that because it is specific to the naivety of youth and the lack of experience, but it's brazen and it's bold and it's good. She'll lose that one day, right? And that's sad. So like I really admire these attributes that she has right now. And I can see how a lot of people might view her as a true heroine for going after what she wants and a true individual following her heart with no, not holding back in anything and being like, essentially being like, screw society. I love that man, and those sentiments are so great. But when mixed with the youth and the lack of knowledge of the world and the lack of experience, I feel like it spells disaster. I would be losing my mind if I was Elinor, like as a fellow eldest sibling or eldest daughter. Speaking of restraint, the amount of restraint that Elinor has throughout this whole every scenario that we're going through here. But like, oh my, I would be out of my mind with this Marianne situation. Marianne is so out of line. And clearly, Mom or Mrs. Dashwood doesn't have much to say about what she has viewed of it. Although I don't think she has the same knowledge and awareness of what's going on as Elinor, because I'm not sure Margaret has disclosed her little story to Mom. I had another random thought when I was thinking about how Willoughby and Marianne were behaving amongst company, or just like in the party in general. They're out in the countryside, like a little bit away from society. Of course, like they're in good company, but if they were in London, I would presume there would be a greater need for actual propriety with all eyes on everyone. So they have this bit of freedom being out in the country, I think. Let me know what you think of that, if that's valid. And maybe we'll find out about that more in the future in the book, in the novel as well. But okay, let's really talk about the problem here. Willoughby, again, is solely to blame for this impropriety. And I don't want to, take full. Marianne deserves some responsibility, but Marianne, in the context between her and Willoughby, as far as like what happens in society and like what is proper, she's a dum dum. She's a dum dum. She knows, but like she's 17 years old, whatever. But she, in my opinion, considering the world they live in, comes across as a very young 17 or just a very immature 17. I can't, Elinor's 19. I can't imagine Elinor had a similar sensibility when she was 17, like 2 years ago. No way. Anyway, Willoughby is to blame for this. He knows clearly. He's a grown man. He's 25 years old, especially at this time. He knows that Marianne is naive and willing to do anything her heart desires, because if that's the case, then how could it be wrong? That's Marianne's whole shtick. That's her whole thing. And that's a lovely, again, I wrote it down again. It's a lovely and valid sentiment. But when you are so young and so naive and so unaware of the world, there are consequences to those chosen actions. This is something that Willoughby knows. What an absolute asshat is what I wrote in here. Like, he's a jerk for making Marianne look like one as well, for making her look like a jerk as well. He's a maybe Elinor won't say it, but I will. I'll say it. Marianne should know better, whatever, but she's a dum-dum because she's young and in love. We've all been there, truly. And I cannot give Willoughby the same leniency because he's far older, a man of society, and he's shown multiple times that he's rude and disrespectful. He's shown his colors so many times, and I think one of the biggest ways he's done it is how he treats his relationship with Marianne within the company that they have and within the context. And he's a bad influence on Marianne, clearly. So how do you view Marianne's behavior at this point in the novel? Let me know what you think of her. Let me know how much let me know how much you feel that her behavior has been influenced by Willoughby. Let me know what you think about all of that. And do you think it's possible for Elinor to do more to control or help Marianne to see her actions in a different light? Do you think that's even possible or no? And do you think she's holding back because she does presume they're engaged? Do you think that's part of why Elinor hasn't truly put her foot down and been like, snap out of it? Okay, chapter 14. The sudden termination of Colonel Brandon's visit at the park, with his steadiness in concealing its cause, filled the mind and raised the wonder of Mrs. Jennings for 2 or 3 days. She was a great wonderer, as everyone must be who has taken a very lively interest in all the comings and goings of all their acquaintance. She wondered with little intermission or pause what could be the reason of it, was sure there must be some bad news, and thought over every kind of distress that could have befallen him, with the fixed determination that he should not escape them all. Something very melancholy must be the matter, I am sure, she said. I could see it in his face. Poor man! I am afraid his circumstances may be bad. The estate at Delaford was never reckoned more than 2,000 a year, and his brother left everything sadly involved. I do think he must have been sent for about money matters, for what else can it be? I wonder whether it is so. I would give anything to know the truth of it. Perhaps it is about Miss Williams, and by the by, I dare say it is, because he looked so conscious when I mentioned her. Maybe she is ill in town. Nothing in the world more likely, for I have a notion she is always rather sickly. I would lay any wager it is about Miss Williams. It is not so very likely he should be distressed in his circumstances now, for he is a very prudent man, and to be sure must have cleared the estate by this time. I wonder what it can be. Maybe his sister is worse at Avignon, and has sent has sent for him over. His setting off in such a hurry seems very like it. Well, I wish him out of all his trouble with all my heart, and a good wife into the bargain. Mrs. Jennings is straight up just rambling. She's like, it's money. No, his daughter is sickly because he's so good with money. Maybe it's his sister. Whatever it is, I hope it's okay, and I hope he also finds a wife. So wondered, so talked Mrs. Jennings, her opinion varying with every fresh conjecture, and all seeming equally probable as they arose. Elinor, though she felt really interested in the welfare of Colonel Brandon, could not bestow all the wonder on his going so suddenly away, which Mrs. Jennings was desirous of her feeling. For besides that, the circumstance did not, in her opinion, justify such lasting amazement or variety of speculation. Her wonder was otherwise disposed of. It was engrossed by the extraordinary silence of her sister and Willoughby on the subject, which they must know to be peculiarly interesting to them all. As this silence continued, every day made it appear more strange and more incompatible with the disposition of both. So we switched topics here. Elinor's like, yeah, I'm curious why Brandon left, but also I'm a little bit more preoccupied wondering why Marianne and Willoughby are being so quiet on their possible engagement. She's like, they have to be engaged because of how they're acting, and nobody has said anything. And she's really, really wondering about this. Are they or aren't they? Because if they aren't, then they've been acting a little crazy. Why they should not openly acknowledge to her mother and herself what their constant behavior to each other declared to have taken place, Elinor could not imagine. She could easily conceive that marriage might not be immediately in their power, for though Willoughby was independent, there was no reason to believe him rich. His estate had been rated by Sir John at about 600 or 700 a year, but he lived at an expense to which that income could hardly be equal, and he had himself often complained of his poverty. But for this strange kind of secrecy maintained by them relative to their engagement, which in fact concealed nothing at all, she could not account, and it was so wholly contradictory to their general opinions and practice that a doubt sometimes entered her mind of their being really engaged, and this doubt was enough to prevent her making any inquiry of Marianne. So she's like, there's absolutely no reason for them to not tell us they're engaged. They have to be engaged. So she's like, why are they not telling us? It doesn't make sense. And then the fact that they're not telling her is making Elinor doubt that they're engaged. That seed of doubt is making her not want to ask Marianne about it. Nothing could be more expressive of attachment to them all than Willoughby's behavior. To Marianne, it had been all the distinguishing tenderness which a lover's heart could give, and to the rest of the family it was the affectionate attention of a son and a brother. The cottage seemed to be considered and loved by him as his home. Many more of his hours were spent there than at Allenham, and if no general engagement collected them at the park, the exercise which called him out in the morning was almost certain of ending there, where the rest of the day was spent by himself at the side of Marianne and by his favorite pointer at her feet. One evening in particular, about a week after Colonel Brandon had left the country, his heart seemed more than usually open to every feeling of attachment to the objects around him. And on Mrs. Dashwood's happening to mention her design of improving the cottage in the spring, he warmly opposed every alteration of a place which affection had established as perfect with him. "What?" he exclaimed, "improve this dear cottage? No, that I will never consent to. Not a stone must be added to its walls, not an inch to its size, if my feelings are regarded." "Do not be alarmed," said Miss Dashwood. "Nothing of the kind will be done, for my mother will never have money enough to attempt it." "I am heartily glad of it," he cried. "May she always be poor, if she can employ her riches no better." "Thank you, Willoughby, but you may be assured that I would not sacrifice one sentiment of local attachment of yours, or of anyone whom I loved, for all the improvements in the world. Depend upon it that that whatever unemployed sum may remain when I make up my accounts in the spring, I would even rather lay it uselessly by than dispose of it in a manner so painful to you. But are you really so attached to this place as to see no defect in it?" "I am," said he. "To me it is faultless. Nay, more, I consider it as the only form of building in which happiness is attainable, and were I rich enough, I would instantly pull comb down and build it up again in the exact plan of this cottage." "With dark narrow stairs and a kitchen that smokes, I suppose?" said Elinor. "Yes," cried he in the same eager tone, "with all and everything belonging to it, in no one convenience or inconvenience about it, should the least variation be perceptible. Then, and then only, under such a roof, I might perhaps be as happy at Combe as I have been at Barton." "I flatter myself," replied Elinor, "that even under the disadvantage of better rooms and a broader staircase, you will hereafter find your own house as faultless as you now do this." "There are certainly circumstances," said Willoughby, "which might greatly endear it to me, but this place will always have one claim on my affection which no other can possibly share." Mrs. Dashwood looked with pleasure at Marianne, whose fine eyes were fixed so expressively on Willoughby, as plainly denoted how well she understood him. "How often did I wish," added he, "when I was at Allenham this time 12 month, or a year ago, that Barton Cottage was inhabited. I never passed within view of it without admiring its situation, and grieving that no one should live in it. How little did I then think that the very first news I should hear from Mrs. Smith when I next came into the country would be that Barton Cottage was taken, and I felt an immediate satisfaction and interest in the event, which nothing but a kind of prescience, or foreknowledge, of what happiness I should experience from it can account for. Must not it have been so, Marianne?" speaking to her in a lowered voice. Then continuing his former tone, he said, "And yet this house you would spoil, Mrs. Dashwood. You would rob it of its simplicity by imaginary improvement. And this dear parlour in which our acquaintance first began, and in which so many happy hours have been since spent by us together, you would degrade to the condition of a common entrance, and everybody would be eager to pass through the room which has hitherto contained within itself the more real accommodation and comfort than any other apartment of the handsomest dimensions in the world could possibly afford." Mrs. Dashwood again assured him that no alteration of the kind should be attempted. "You are a good woman," he replied warmly. he warmly replied. Your promise makes me easy. Extend it a little farther, and it will make me happy. Tell me that not only your house will remain the same, but that I shall ever find you and yours as unchanged as your dwelling, and that you will always consider me with kindness, which has made everything belonging to you so dear to me. The promise was readily given, and Willoughby's behavior during the whole of the evening declared at once his affection and happiness. Shall we see you tomorrow to dinner? Said Mrs. Dashwood when he was leaving them. I do not ask you to come in the morning, for we must walk to the park to call on Lady Middleton. He engaged to be with them by 4 o'clock. Ominous. This chapter gives me the heebie-jeebies. So I do feel there is a sense of foreboding at the end of this chapter. Just the way the sentence structure is, just the way Willoughby's like, please promise you'll always love me. Like, something is up. He must know something, or he must know that he is about to, I really want to curse. Am I allowed to curse on YouTube? I'm not going to do it. I think that possibly the worst part about this Willoughby business is that I believe he really does love Marianne. But I believe that he is living in a fantasy, okay? He is using her as an escape from a life that he is so clearly avoiding or is miserable with. Commenting on their house in such a way makes me think he literally hates his home and possibly the old woman or his aunt, Mrs. Smith, who lives in his potential home, because potentially he is the inheritor of this estate, right? I feel that this young man is so deeply sad, and I feel like there is something buried so deep inside of him, some trauma, some sadness, some something, and he is like avoiding everything and living in this fantasy world and essentially using the Dashwoods. Now, this is my psych evaluation of Willoughby. I really do think his backstory would be so interesting, and I am really interested to see if we get more of it in the novel. But I think he's troubled, and I think he's using Marianne to entertain flights of fancy that he knows he shouldn't be doing or do. He knows this. I know he does, and therefore he sucks. Where is his integrity? I have compassion for him, considering the level of avoidance that I feel is happening as his, like, within his character. You know, I feel like maybe he has had a troubled past, but also maybe not. Maybe he's just that much of an asshole, and I'm trying to make up for it by building him a backstory. I could find that compassion for him, but it's there, but like I don't like him, and it does not, in my mind, excuse him at all. So he says he always felt a pull to the cottage where the ladies are living, and after meeting with the Dashwoods, he felt that it was basically fated because he always felt such a pull there, and he always wanted to imagine someone living there. So he must have felt that way because he knew in some way that the Dashwoods would be there and they would be a part of his life. And that is so romantic. And then he says that this place means more to me than any other place for one particular reason. And clearly he's insinuating it's Marianne, and that is lovely and so romantic. So, I get it. His appeal in that moment, at least. There's a glimmer of authenticity from him in that moment, just for him to go right back into joking around about the revision of the home and putting like a mask on again, if you will. He literally cannot bear the thought of the home being any different than it is in this fantasy life he's living in his mind with them. He can't. And I really think that something is already up at this point. Like, dude, what? Like, he's like, promise you'll always think of me the same. Why would you say that unless you know that you're about to, And it's difficult to read this novel knowing the story. I know what happens. And so, like, I am constantly kind of checking my bias as far as what I know about certain characters and certain plot lines. I genuinely think that if I was reading this blind, I know I know that I would feel the same about Willoughby because I have experience with Willoughbys and I can clock them from a mile away now. There's all of this professing of love, all of this affection, and yet seemingly no proposal because we don't know about it. So unless I know about it for a fact, same as Elinor, then it's like, what's going on? Speculating, and again, I was trying to forget anything that I know about the story. I would be thinking his aunt, Mrs. Smith, found out that he brought Marianne to the house and they were just frolicking around the house. Like, that's so rude and improper. And I wouldn't be surprised if she was like reprimanding him in some way or reprimanded him and he kind of felt off and felt bad. And he's like, please still love me even when you find out my aunt hates me. But truly at this point, when I was reading, I was really questioning why the women don't question him. But also I get it, because like I said, I've known Willoughbys in my life and I've gone through phases where I didn't question them. There was always something in the back of my mind, but you just don't listen to it. But I guess Elinor is questioning it a little bit, but she's not questioning him or his character necessarily. But he has so much time on his hands, and there is brief mention of him having occupations in the morning and then visiting with them in the evening. But I'm like, where are your friends? And where is your family? And don't you want to visit people? And what do you do all day? And like, he's with them all the time. Like, aren't the ladies wondering what he does with his life? Like, what? And then this made me think that and about Edward, because Edward also has a lot of time on his hands because he is well off and he doesn't work. And he also, admittedly, earlier on in the novel, admittedly not ambitious and not very much interested in making anything big of his life. So I found it interesting comparing and contrasting these two male characters, Edward and Willoughby. And, it made it really clear, obviously, that these external things like ambition or going after something or having friends and family ultimately do not matter, because what matters when you're looking at these two characters is their character and their integrity. So anyway, I was just thinking about that a lot. And with all of that being said, I can see why the ladies don't necessarily think twice about him, but also what the heck. The discussion questions are just things to think about. Do I just have a vendetta against Willoughby, or are you also seeing through him, or at least thinking that something is suspicious? And if you know this story, tell me how you think your foreknowledge of, or your prescience of what happens is affecting how you read it or how you take it in this time around. And again, as a side note, it wasn't lost on me that when I was thinking about this chapter, it's circled around to people's character and how it varies despite similarities, like in this context with Edward and Willoughby. But we've talked about this a lot before, about how it's kind of like a meditation and a study on the intricacies of being human, and how everyone is so different. And I found it really interesting that I kind of naturally circled back to that thought. Okay, for real, buckle up. If you don't know what's happening in chapter 15, buckle up. Chapter 15. Mrs. Dashwood's visit to Lady Middleton took place the next day, and two of her daughters went with her. But Marianne excused herself from being of the party under some trifling pretext of employment, and her mother, who concluded that a promise had been made by Willoughby the night before of calling on her while they were absent, was perfectly satisfied with her remaining at home. On their return from the park, they found Willoughby's curricle and servant in waiting at the cottage, and Mrs. Dashwood was convinced that her conjecture or guess had been just, or had been right. So far, it was all as she had foreseen, but on entering the house, she beheld what no foresight had taught her to expect. They were no sooner in the passage than Marianne came hastily out of the parlor, apparently in violent affliction or distress, with her handkerchief at her eyes, and without noticing them, ran upstairs. Surprised and alarmed, they proceeded directly into the room she had just quitted, where they found only Willoughby, who was leaning against the mantelpiece with his back towards them. He turned round on their coming in, and his countenance showed that he strongly partook of the emotions which overpowered Marianne, so he is feeling similarly. "Is anything the matter with her?" cried Mrs. Dashwood as she entered. "Is she ill?" "I hope not," he replied, trying to look cheerful, and with a forced smile presently added, "It is I who may rather expect to be ill, for I am now suffering under a very heavy disappointment." I'm not joking, when I was reading this the first time, I wanted to scream. And we'll circle back around to this, I will have a lot to say about this, he is a narcissist. And this is the only thing I needed to read to know that. Anyway, disappointment? Yes, for I am unable to keep my engagement with you. Mrs. Smith has this morning exercised the privilege of riches upon a poor dependent cousin by sending me on business to London. I have just received my dispatches and taken my farewell of Allenham, and by way of exhilaration I am now come to take my farewell of you. To London? And are you going this morning? Almost this moment. This is very unfortunate, but Mrs. Smith must be obliged, and her business will not detain you from us long, I hope. He colored as he replied, "You are very kind, but I have no idea of returning into Devonshire immediately. My visits to Mrs. Smith are never repeated within the 12-month, or within the year." "And is Mrs. Smith your only friend? Is Allenham the only house in the neighbourhood to which you will be welcome?" For shame, Willoughby, can you wait for an invitation here? His color increased, and with his eyes fixed on the ground, he only replied, "You are too good." That's a refusal. That's like an elusive no. Mrs. Dashwood looked at Elinor with surprise. Elinor felt equal amazement. For a few moments everyone was silent. Mrs. Dashwood first spoke. "I have only to add, my dear Willoughby, that at Barton Cottage you will always be welcome. For I will not press you to return here immediately, because you only can judge how far that might be pleasing to Mrs. Smith, and on this head I shall be no more disposed to question your judgment than to doubt your inclination." "My engagements at present," replied Willoughby confusedly, "are of such a nature that I dare not flatter myself." He stopped. Mrs. Dashwood was too much astonished to speak, and another pause succeeded. This was broken by Willoughby, who said with a faint smile, "It is folly to linger in this manner. I will not torment myself any longer by remaining among friends whose society it is impossible for me to now enjoy." He then hastily took leave of them all and left the room. They saw him step into his carriage, and in a minute it was out of sight. Mrs. Dashwood felt too much for speech, and instantly quitted the parlour to give way in solitude to the concern and alarm which this sudden departure occasioned. Elinor's uneasiness was at least equal to her mother's. She thought of what had just passed with anxiety and distrust. Willoughby's behaviour in taking leave of them, his embarrassment and affectation of cheerfulness, and, above all, his unwillingness to accept her mother's invitation, a backwardness so unlike a lover, so unlike himself, greatly disturbed her. One moment she feared that no serious design had ever been formed on his side, or no serious liking of Marianne, no affection for them, had actually been formed, and the next, that some unfortunate quarrel had taken place between him and her sister. The distress in which Marianne had quitted the room was such as a serious quarrel could most reasonably account for, though when she considered what Marianne's love for him was, a quarrel seemed almost impossible. But whatever might be the particulars of their separation, her sister's affliction was indubitable or evident, and she thought with the tenderest compassion of that violent sorrow which Marianne was in all probability not merely giving way to as a relief, but feeding and encouraging as a duty. Wait, that's such a beautiful observation of her sister. She said, or it says, and she thought with the tenderest compassion of that violent sorrow which Marianne was in all probability not merely giving way to as a relief, but feeding and encouraging as a duty. I just find that so beautiful. It's such a beautiful observation of her sister. She's like, I know that she feels so strongly and that she needs to feel it in order to deal with it and process it, like as like a way to relieve the feeling. She has to let it out. But that Marianne is also feeding and encouraging it as a duty, because Marianne is like, this is devastating. This is this, and therefore I must, as a duty to these emotions, I must do them justice, and I must give in to them. I just love that. Okay. In about a half an hour, her mother returned, and though her eyes were red, her countenance was not uncheerful. "Our dear Willoughby is now some miles from Barton, Elinor," said she as she sat down to work, "and with how heavy a heart does he travel? It is all very strange, so suddenly to be gone. It seems but the work of a moment. And last night he was with us so happy, so cheerful, so affectionate. And now, after only 10 minutes' notice, gone too without intending to return. Something more than what he owned to us must have happened. He did not speak, he did not behave like himself. You must have seen the difference as well as I. What can it be? Can they have quarreled? Why else would he have such unwillingness to accept your invitation here?" "It was not inclination that he wanted, Elinor. I could plainly see that. He had not the power of accepting it. I have thought it all over, I assure you, and I can perfectly account for everything that at first seemed strange to me as well as you." "Can you indeed?" "Yes. I've explained it to myself in the most satisfactory way." This is so interesting. Mrs. Dashwood loves her stories. "But you, Elinor, who love to doubt where you can, it will not satisfy you, I know, but you shall not talk to me out of my trust in it." Out of her trust in the story that she just formulated to make herself feel better. But she's like, I know Elinor won't go for this. "I am persuaded that Mrs. Smith suspects his regard for Marianne, disapproves of it, perhaps because she has other views for him, and on that account is eager to get him away, and that the business which she sends him off to transact is invented as an excuse to dismiss him. This is what I believe to have happened. He is moreover aware that she does disapprove the connection. He dares not, therefore, at present confess to her his engagement with Marianne, and he feels himself obliged from his dependent situation to give in to her schemes and absent himself from Devonshire for a while. You will tell me, I know, that this may or may not have happened, but I will listen to no cavil or no petty objections, unless you can point out any other method of understanding the affair as satisfactory as this. And now, Elinor, what do you have to say? Or what have you to say? This is so interesting. She knows Elinor is not going to like this because she knows it's made up and it's not true, just because they don't know. Like, it could be true, but they don't know that it's true. But she's like, this makes me feel good. And this means that everything I wanted can still happen. And therefore, this is the only thing I will accept, which is understandable if she needs to do that for her mind and to process through this and to deal with this in the moment. But to not, she's automatically like, I don't want to hear anything you have to say to Elinor. So she said, and now, Elinor, what have you to say? And Elinor says, nothing, for you have anticipated my answer. Elinor's like, you know what I'm going to say. So Mrs. Dashwood says, then you would have told me that it might or might not have happened. Oh, Elinor, how incomprehensible are your feelings. You would rather take evil upon credit than good. You would rather look out for misery for Marianne and guilt for poor Willoughby than apology for the latter. You are resolved to think him blamable because he took leave of us with less affection than his usual behavior is shown, and is no allowance to be made for inadvertence or like a mistake, or for spirits depressed by recent disappointment. Are no probabilities to be accepted merely because they are not certainties? Is nothing due to the man whom we have all so much reason to love and no reason in the world to think ill of? To the possibility of motives unanswerable in themselves, though unavoidably secret for a while? And after all, what is it you suspect him of? Elinor, I can hardly tell you myself, but suspicion of something unpleasant is the inevitable consequence of such an alteration as we have just witnessed in him. There is great truth, however, in what you have now urged of the allowances which ought to be made for him, and it is my wish to be candid in my judgment of everybody. Willoughby may undoubtedly have very sufficient reasons for his conduct, and I hope that he has, but it would have been more like Willoughby to acknowledge them at once. Secrecy may be advisable, but still I cannot help wondering at its being practiced by him. So she's like, sure, like something may have happened, or maybe what you're saying is true, but it's weird that Willoughby kept it a secret. Like, he could have just told us. I think what's throwing Elinor off the most is that Willoughby was so out of character. Like, he was so not acting like himself. So Mrs. Dashwood says, do not blame him, however, for departing from his character where the deviation is necessary. But you really do admit the justice of what I have said in his defense? I am happy, and he is acquitted. Elinor, not entirely. It may be proper to conceal their engagement, if they are engaged, from Mrs. Smith, and if that is the case, it must be highly expedient or appropriate for Willoughby to be but little in Devonshire at present. But this is no excuse for their concealing it from us. Concealing it from us? This is Mom. My dear child, do you accuse Willoughby and Marianne of concealment? This is strange indeed, when your eyes have been reproaching them every day for incautiousness. I want no proof of their affection, said Elinor, but of their engagement, I do. I am perfectly satisfied of both, said Mom. Elinor says, yet not a syllable has been said to you on the subject by either of them. Mrs. Dashwood, I have not wanted syllables where actions have spoken so plainly. Has not his behavior to Marianne and to all of us for at least the last fortnight declared that he loved and considered her as his future wife? Am I blocking my face? And that he felt for us the attachment of the nearest relation? Have we not perfectly understood each other? Has not my consent been daily asked by his looks, his manner, his attentive and affectionate respect? My Elinor, is it possible to doubt their engagement? How could such a thought occur to you? How is it to be supposed that Willoughby, persuaded as he must be of your sister's love, should leave her, and leave her perhaps for months without telling her of his affection? That they should part with a mutual exchange of confidence? I confess, replied Elinor, that every circumstance except one is in favor of their engagement. But that one is the total silence of both on the subject, and with me it almost outweighs every other. Mrs. Dashwood, how strange this is! You must think wretchedly indeed of Willoughby, if after all that has openly passed between them you can doubt the nature of the terms on which they are together. Has he been acting a part in his behavior to your sister all this time? Do you suppose him really indifferent to her? Elinor, no, I cannot think that. He must and does love her, I am sure. Mrs. Dashwood, but with a strange kind of tenderness if he can leave her with such indifference, such carelessness of the future as you attribute to him. Elinor, You must remember, my dear mother, that I have never considered this matter as certain. I have had my doubts, I confess, but they are fainter than they were, and they may soon be entirely done away. If we find they correspond, every fear of mine will be removed. So if they correspond, so if Marianne and Willoughby essentially mail each other, if they send letters to each other, that you can't do that unless you are married or together or engaged. So if they do that, then that'll be their confirmation. But they also could just ask Marianne, Mrs. Dashwood, a mighty concession indeed. If you were to see them at the altar, you would suppose they were going to be married. Ungracious girl! But I require no such proof. Nothing in my opinion has ever passed to justify doubt. No secrecy has been attempted. All has been uniformly open and unreserved. You cannot doubt your sister's wishes. It must be Willoughby, therefore, whom you suspect. But why? Is he not a man of honor and feeling? Has there been any inconsistency on his side to create alarm? Can he be deceitful? I feel like in this moment, Mrs. Dashwood, or mom, is a little bit, for lack of a better term, triggered. I think that she still is clearly processing what's going on. And I think she's scared that perhaps they really aren't engaged, and that, it is weird that they haven't told anything to us, but I think that might be very deep down. And she's like, obviously they're together. It's so obvious. They're so affectionate together. I don't need them to tell me anything. But I think that she is definitely kind of set off right now. I hope not. I believe not, cried Elinor. I love Willoughby, sincerely love him, and suspicion of his integrity cannot be more painful to yourself than to me. It has been involuntary, and I will not encourage it. I was startled, I confess, by the alteration in his manners this morning. He did not speak like himself, and did not return your kindness with any cordiality or warmth. But all this may be explained by such a situation of his affairs as you have supposed. He had just parted from my sister, had seen her leave him in the greatest affliction, and if he felt obliged, from a fear of offending Mrs. Smith, to resist the temptation of returning here soon, and yet aware that by declining your invitation, by saying that he was going away for some time, he should seem to act an ungenerous, a suspicious part by our family, he might well be embarrassed and disturbed. In such a case, a plain and open avowal, or a plain honest statement of his difficulties would have been more to his honor, I think, as well as more consistent with his general character. But I will not raise objections against anyone's conduct on so illiberal a foundation as a difference in judgment from myself, or a deviation from what I may think right and consistent. Mrs. Dashwood says in response, you speak very properly. Willoughby certainly does not deserve to be suspected, though we have not known him long. He is no stranger in this part of the world, and who has ever spoken to his disadvantage? Had he been in a situation to act independently and marry immediately, it might have been odd that he should leave us without acknowledging everything to me at once. But this is not the case. It is an engagement in some respects not prosperously begun, for their marriage must be at a very uncertain distance, and even secrecy, as far as it can be observed, may now be very advisable. They were interrupted by the entrance of Margaret, and Elinor was then at the liberty to think over the representations of her mother, to acknowledge the probability of many, and hope for the justice of all. They saw nothing of Marianne till dinner time, when she entered the room and took her place at the table without saying a word. Her eyes were red and swollen, and it seemed as if her tears were even then restrained with difficulty. She avoided the looks of them all, could neither eat nor speak, and after some time, on her mother's silently pressing her hand with tender compassion, her small degree of fortitude was quite overcome. She burst into tears and left the room. This violent oppression of spirits continued the whole evening. She was without any power, because she was without any desire of command over herself. The slightest mention of anything relative to Willoughby overpowered her in an instant. And though her family were most anxiously attentive to her comfort, it was impossible for them, if they spoke at all, to keep clear of every subject which her feelings connected with him. Oh my God, I'm freaking exhausted. Okay, let's do this. Poor Marianne. So I glossed over it a little bit in the last chapter, but the lack of communication between the Dashwoods with this whole Marianne situation is obviously adding to the problem big time. So Elinor feels they must be engaged, but they haven't declared it explicitly, so she fears of, bringing it up with Marianne and like insulting her by suggesting that they're not engaged, or by questioning their attachment. Sorry, there's a little fly that's really driving me crazy, if you're wondering why I'm doing this. And then in this chapter, we have Mrs. Dashwood at the beginning letting Marianne stay home from a visit to Barton Park, because she believes that there had to have been an agreement between Marianne and Willoughby the night before that they would meet in the morning, so that they could get engaged. That's what she thinks is happening. That's why she lets Marianne stay home. But she doesn't ask. The fact that when The Dashwoods come into the house. They see Marianne run up the stairs in distress. She is devastated. And then they walk into the room that she came from, and Willoughby turns around and says, I don't think she's ill. It is I who is blah, 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 blah. Bro, what? Dude, dude is a narcissist. That's literally all. I mean, I already knew this. I wanted to say it when we were discussing the last chapter, but I wanted to save it for this particular moment. What do you mean? The lack of acknowledgement of Marianne or her devastation, the lack of like participation that he had in that moment, and then just to turn it around and be like, I am disappointed because I need to do this. And it's not just this one statement that makes me think he's a narcissist. I knew this from the start. I already knew this, but like, this is just a great example. Just a great example. And also, is he disappointed because he's leaving the Dashwoods, or is his disappointment because he wasn't given the money? Because he says, I have to go to London because a distant cousin was bestowed, riches were bestowed upon them, and that's why I'm going to London to, like, you know, figure out all the logistics of that. Is he disappointed because he's leaving the ladies, or is he disappointed because he wasn't given the money? Because I genuinely think it's because of the money. I don't think I'm sorry. I think it's because of the money. I think that is what he is referring to when he says, it is I who may rather expect to be ill, for I am now suffering under a very heavy disappointment. For I am unable to keep my engagement with you. Mrs. Smith has this morning exercised the privilege of riches upon a poor dependent cousin by sending me on business to London. And he's also so uncomfortable through the scene with the love and attention and you know, invitation that the Dashwoods are giving him. He gets so uncomfortable, and I live for it. I'm sorry. And I also love that in this very high emotion, tense conversation, when there's a lot of shock and not much time to think, like, all of this is very abrupt. The Dashwoods, Mrs. Dashwood, true to her word, she has always said that she does not care if the men that her daughters marry have money. She just cares if they're in love. You know, she's very much been about that. They didn't ask once about the money or about the business to London. They didn't ask once about that. They don't care, which I kind of wonder if that added to his uncomfortability a little bit. And, you know, I don't think that Willoughby is heartless. Of course, I think that he's disappointed that he has to leave Marianne and the Dashwoods. We just spoke about his whole fantasy and how he lives in this fantasy of being with them at Barton Cottage and all of these things. I do think that is adding to his upset, but I just don't believe that is his only upset. And as far as Mrs. Dashwood's theory about why Willoughby left so abruptly, about Mrs. Smith being upset about his attachment with Marianne and how he doesn't have enough money to marry right now, so they have to wait a little bit, or Mrs. Smith can't know that they're actually engaged, so he has to leave. Like, I think that there's some validity to that, validity to that story. I don't think she's like completely delusional or anything like that. I think that is certainly a possibility. I don't think he's coming back, like, at all. I think that Mrs. Dashwood's whole story is built upon the fact that he'll come back and Marianne and him have this secret engagement, and, you know, everything's going to work out the way we always thought it would, but he ain't coming back. There's no way. And I found it really fun and interesting how Mrs. Dashwood was in this chapter is Marianne. Like, we really see where Marianne gets it in this chapter, and I loved seeing inside Mrs. Dashwood's brain in this way. Like, her big, sweeping, dramatic statements, her argument or like intense discussion with Elinor, you know, and Elinor is just sitting there listening and kind of firing back these logical, grounded responses, and Mrs. Dashwood is like, you think he's the worst, and Elinor is like, I just don't know. And she's like, obviously you hate him. And I just found it really interesting. So this chapter is like a lot to take in. There's almost so much content in it and so much clarity in it, but also more questions are obviously brought up, but it doesn't feel like there's as much to discuss because there's not as much speculation. This is kind of what we've been leading to with this suspicion around Willoughby and, you know, are they engaged? Are they not? We still don't know, but we can make an assumption, right? It's so interesting seeing the fallout of Willoughby's leaving through everyone's eyes. So, you know, again, just like a little wrap up, like Mrs. Dashwood is Delulu, but also so pure. She just wants things to work out. And I do love that she sees her daughter in love and loved, and therefore that equals all things good and engagement and happiness. She's like, there is nothing to question here. They love each other, and that is all I need to know. But in her mind, that equals engagement. But it's also unrealistic. She's living in her own fantasy, like we talked about with Willoughby. And Elinor has her 2 feet on the ground, right? And again, like I said, I don't think that Mrs. Dashwood is delusional, but do you think that Mrs. Dashwood is aware that it is suspicious that there's no official declaration of engagement between Marianne and Willoughby, and she's just avoiding that thought? Or do you think she genuinely like believes they're engaged and like doesn't need any more information? I wonder if Mrs. Dashwood is deeply affected still. And this would make sense. Like, I think that she is very likely still deeply affected by her husband passing and by losing her almost lifelong home and everything that brought them to this moment. In this moment, I think is triggering her, activating her, affecting her. Of course, she wants to believe the best. Of course, she wants to believe that Willoughby is coming back and is honorable. Anything else would very likely feel like way too much to bear on top of everything else that she's been through. And I think that that very much might be why she is in this, fantasy, and why she is kind of giving into solely believing a situation that she has no evidence to believe is true, except for the affection between Marianne and Willoughby. So then I was thinking about Elinor, and I was thinking about maybe I see her as this very mindful, compassionate character that reads people incredibly well because I know the true nature of the characters, because like I've said, I know this story. I do feel that I would still think that she is kind of the grounded, true North character, reliable narrator of everything that's going on. And just to touch on Marianne's reaction, Marianne is very outwardly emotional. And as Elinor states in that beautiful sentence, when Marianne is feeling something, she is not only going to feel it because she has to, because like as a human, like she has to feel it and she needs to process through it, but also because she feels a duty to that feeling, because that's what she values. She values the humanity of emotion and feeling and passion. So she is going to openly work through this. But I think that Elinor and Mrs. Dashwood could see Marianne's distress and attribute it to whatever story they've cooked up. I think that Marianne would be upset whether Willoughby was leaving for a few months or whether he's never coming back. But I do also think that Elinor, I think, is suspicious, but like, why would you not be more suspicious or look upon Marianne's behavior as answers to these questions that you're wondering? Like, we're wondering, are they engaged? What's going on? Is he coming back? Like, look at Marianne. What do you think her response means in this situation? Do you know what I mean? Because she is so devastated. The poor thing is heartbroken. And I think that, yes, she would have been upset either way, but like the level of upset, the lack of hope within the upset, the power that's been immediately taken away from her, I just think it really points to heartbreak and devastation more than like a longing and I'll see him again, but not for a while kind of a thing. Now, that's me, like reading into it. I just think that there would be some semblance of hope within Marianne's response, whether that showed up as her being very confident and upset, but confident that he would return, like being really steadfast in her belief in her connection with him, or, maybe not right away. We're like in a very acute reaction response time. This is still this like right after it happened, but I don't know, there's just no hope there. And I think that there would be a little spark if she believed there was still hope between her and Willoughby. So how do you think Marianne's reaction to the situation measures up to Mrs. Dashwood's theory and Elinor's suspicions? Let me know what you think about that. That is it for this section of Volume 1 in Sense and Sensibility. Thank you so much for being here with me. Let me know what all of your thoughts are down below, and I cannot wait to see you in the next one. Louis says bye too. Bye.